Welcome to the Nimoy studio. Welcome to the Hammer Museum. I'm Claudia Bester. I'm the Director of Public Programs here, and I'm really thrilled to welcome you to tonight's reading by Howard Rodman with Virginia Heffernan. Yay. Before we begin, I'd like to invite you all to come back to the Hammer on Saturday night on June 8th from 8 to 10 p.m. We're having a big party to celebrate our summer exhibition openings. I also want to mention a few upcoming Hammer programs you might be interested in. Tomorrow night, the renowned theater director Peter Sellers is going to have a sneak preview of his major new theatrical work that he's about to take on the road. That's going to be in the Billy Wilder Theater next door. They just finished rehearsals about 10 minutes ago. Please silence your cell phones. And then on June 6th, the artist Arthur Jaffa will be here in dialogue with slavery historian Sadia Hartman from Columbia University. And on June 9th, artist Sarah Lucas will be here in dialogue with writer Maggie Nelson. Also for Hammer members, we have a special members-only screening of the new Martin Scorsese film about Bob Dylan in 1975, along with the whiskey tasting from Bob Dylan's own distillery. That's on June 11th. So we have lots going on here at the Hammer, and we hope that you'll all come back and visit us. Museum admission is always free, and our public programs are also always free. So on to tonight's program. Howard Rodman, who I know a lot of you here are friends with Howard Rodman, who is just wonderful, and also someone I'm proud to call a friend. He's also the past president of the Writers Guild of America West and a professor and former chair at USC School of Cinematic Arts. And later this month, he will be the artistic director of the Sundance Screenwriting Labs. He wrote the screenplays for the films Joe Gould's Secret, which premiered at the Sundance Film Festival in 2008, August, which starred Josh Hartnett, Rip Torn, and David Bowie, Savage Grace, which depicted Julianne Moore and Eddie Redmayne as mother and son in behaving very badly in various European locales. He's worked with a rogues gallery of filmmakers, including Tony Scott, Steven Soderbergh, Tom Cruise, George Clooney, Grant Heslov, Errol Morris, Chantal Ackerman, Clive Barker, Tom Kalin, David Lynch, and Maurice Sendak, and he even once wrote a screenplay for Michael Jackson. Along the way, he was inducted into the Screenwriters Hall of Fame and was named a Chevalier de l'Ordre des Arts et Lettres, or a Knight of Arts and Letters, by the government of France. His previous novel, Destiny Express, was praised by Thomas Pynchon, who described it as daringly imagined and darkly romantic, a moral thriller. His new epic novel is The Great Eastern, whose publication date we celebrate today. And it will be the inspiration for tonight's discussion. Howard's going to read a little bit, I believe, and he will be in conversation with Virginia Heffernan. Virginia Heffernan has been called America's preeminent cultural critic and a public intellectual for the 21st century. She's a journalist, critic, and author, most recently of the book Magic and Loss, The Internet as Art. She's also a contributing editor at Wired Magazine, a co-host of Slate's Trumpcast podcast, and a columnist at the LA Times. So please join me in giving a warm welcome to Howard Rodman and Virginia Heffernan.
So you've read the book. That's great, you came prepared on day one. But even if you have read the book, and certainly if you haven't, the language of it is like nothing you've ever read, unless you're just fresh off Moby Dick. So I insisted that Howard read. And I will say, it really was over his objections. Like, you weren't staging those objections.
I didn't bring my reading glasses, so that's how honest this is.
And he has to read from my copy. But because I want your heads to be filled with what fills your head, which is this extraordinary kind of seafaring language.
Well, thank you, I think.
I think it's 169, right?
So before we start, I have a lot of thank yous to say. I really want to thank Claudia and all of the people at the Hammer for making this possible. This is such a wonderful venue, and I cannot tell you how many lovely evenings I've spent there, and to spend one here is just like a dream come true. So Really grateful for that. And I would so much like to thank Virginia for coming. She crossed the continent to be with us tonight. You know, I mean, got into one of those machines that, you know, and you know, risked her life to be here.
Yeah, so it was very different.
So I'm deeply grateful to her. I also would like to thank all of you, because if you've ever seen a public conversation without a public, it's pretty dismal. I'm going to read a passage from the novel. Let me see if I can find it. You dog-eared it, I think?
It's 169.
Got it. Just to sort of set up the passage I'm going to read, I think many of you are probably familiar with the Jules Verne's figure, Captain Nemo. If you've only read him in English, there's a lot about him you don't know, because the English translator left out much of his character and all of his politics to make the book palatable for England, because the Captain Nemo that Jules Verne wrote hated the English, and for damn good reason. What you need to know is that Captain Nemo in Jules Verne land was born Prince Dakkar in Bundelkhand in India, and that during the Sepoy Rebellion in 1857, he took the side of his people against empire, and the English, not pleased with this, killed his wife and kids. So he decided to have no truck with civilization ever again and spend his life underwater, living a life quite apart from the barbarity of quote-unquote civilization, but every once in a while sinking an English ship if he could. In the course of the book, as you will learn when you read it, and as you will learn from tonight's discussion, he has a particular enmity toward the transatlantic telegraphic cable. And so I want to read this passage about his feelings about telegraphy, if we can. His first encounter with the world of telegraphy was one of cryptographic tenderness, a message from Madhya, encoded from prying or intervening eyes via the Ho&Co telegraph chart. Later, when the prince was in Cambridge, he did again correspond with Madhya via telegraph, using other shorthands. His missives would be taken to a telegraph office, and from there transmitted in turn to London, to Paris, thence by rail and other conveyances overland to Geneva, Milan, Zagreb, Plovdiv, Ankara, Baghdad, Tehran, Karachi. They would take weeks or even months to arrive, and at times the missives would, due to the travails of transit, be lost entirely. Other times the transit would be by sea from London to Bombay, thence by train or carriage, delayed by vagaries in the weather and by stops necessitated by commerce. To the young prince, the telegraph was an instrument for conveying, over long distance, love's exquisite sentiments, its longings, its gratifications. The idea that the telegraph might be purposed as an instrument of commerce, empire, dominion occurred to him secondarily, if at all. The full force of telegraphy would hit him only later in the 1850s, when the Honorable Company began its annexations. It was as much a conquest by wire as by militia, an insight rendered acute when in 1857 the company offered £20,000 a year for a cable spanning the Red Sea from London to India. The prince realized that with one swift clip, he could do as much damage to empire as with a regiment of fusiliers. The proposition seemed simple to him. Wherever the spider of empire sought to weave her web, Nemo would snap it. Wherever news was conveyed more quickly than a man could carry it, Nemo would slow it down. He knew from the battles in his own land and from the efforts of the Kandiotes against Ottoman rule that rapid communication could only benefit the overlord. If you kill an Englishman, another grows in his place, but if you keep the Englishman from making known his wish if you kill the Englishman here before he can make known his wish to the Englishman there, you've won a battle without a shot being fired. In Nemo's mind, there was even more to it. What made Bundelkhand its own world was its distance from other realms. His palace was not just 9 miles from Jhansi, it was 3 hours. Was not just 650 miles from Bombay, it was 9 days if you did not for a moment cease your walking. And if the Atlantic were no longer a barrier between there and here, if the Pacific could be spanned in moments, if each toll of the lutine bell were heard not only in the underwriting room of Lloyd's, but all over London and the continent and down to Bombay and across to Boston and in Peking and Jakarta, in Osaka, in Auckland, the second toll rung before the first had ceased to echo, that would be a world in which empire would never again be defeated. Worse, a world in which all habit, custom, distinction, cuisine, language, sport, pleasure, devotion, musical scales, decorative jars, the clouds that scud, the clouds that linger, the feel of sisal fabric on the rug that leads to the bedroom, the sound the Betwa River makes when its banks overflow, the sound the Betwa River makes in drought when it is all but dry, the high musk that seeps from bedchamber doors, the dull clang of large pots being washed just outside the palace walls, the German street cologne worn by officers of the company designed to convince them they'd not left home when every sight and smell and sound that hypothesis would contradict could never again be sacred.
It was fun for us, too. How do you... There's something sort of super heroic. I can't write fiction to save my life, as one thing. I tried to write a short story, and I always want to write essays, just normal, 500 words where you tell people what to think. So my short story went like this. A girl went in and sat on the carpet, and then she had this thought about Wittgenstein, open quotes. So
I want to read that.
I thought the carpet, I had introduced a fictional element, and then I was done. Anyway, but you live in this, these are like florid fantasies, global fantasies with so many datelines. Tell me the origin story behind writing this book.
I think first off, the same origin stories that many writers share, which is unhappy childhood.
Sure.
I stuck my nose in books because they created a world that I could escape to that I liked a lot better than the one I found myself in. What's that Steely Dan lyric? Any world I'm welcome to is better than the one I come from. And I think the membrane between what was reading and what was writing was very permeable to me. People would write wonderful worlds that I would disappear and climb into, pulp worlds primarily, pulp science fiction, pulp adventure like Jules Verne. And then I realized at a fairly young age that I could purpose-built or make bespoke worlds that I could climb into that were even better suited to me than the ones I loved so well. And so I think I started writing as a way of world building that I could then climb into and pull the hatch down over my head and spend time there when my mom wanted me to go out and play. So that's the sort of general origin. The kind of Archduke Ferdinand of how this happened is... I was in Paris. I heard there was a shop that sold books by Jules Verne, that sold only books by Jules Verne. It was called L'Île Mystérieuse. And since I loved Jules Verne, I was going to go to that shop. And I went in, and in fact, every single book in the shop was by Jules Verne. And the proprietor was there, and it was pretty clear from his demeanor that he was one of these proprietors who's a lot happier if no book ever leaves the store. So I started talking to him, and there was a wonderful, I don't know if you know the Hetzel edition of Jules Verne's, but they have red leather covers with gold intaglio with astrolabes and armillary spheres and boats and balloons. And you look at this cover, and it's like, it was like mother's milk to me. And so I wanted that book. And I went to the proprietor, whose name I later found out was Michel Rotel, and I said, Monsieur, je voudrais acheter ça. And he said, didn't say no, but he didn't say yes. And he pulled out two books, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea and The Mysterious Island. And he asked me, what is the passage between these two books? And I said, well, Captain Nemo's in both of them. And he sort of didn't say anything. And then he put down 20,000 Leagues and held up next to Mysterious Island, The Children of Captain Grant. And then he said, and what is the passage between these two books? And I said, Captain Grant. And then he put down the books and walked away and walked into his basement. And I thought I'd failed the test, but I didn't know what the consequences were. And then he didn't come back for 5 and 10 and 15 minutes. And I thought, if he dies down there, do I have to stay here forever? I didn't know the etiquette. So I waited and waited, and like 20 minutes later, he came back with a book in his hand. And finally he spoke. He said, I will not sell you that book that you want. And I thought, oh God, I failed the test. Maybe it was the wrong character I mentioned. He said, those books are for decorators who buy them by the yard for the homes of the bourgeoisie. He said, you are a reader. You know, Monsieur Verne. I would not sell you one of these. This is the same book, but I will sell it to you for $30. And so it began, I would not presume to call it a friendship, but a ritual where every time I'd go to Paris, the first thing I would do, I would visit L'Île Mystérieuse. I would go to Monsieur Hotel, and he would take out his chess set, and he would insist that I play chess, and he would beat me. I later found out that he was a grandmaster. And then I would say, I want to buy a book, and he would say, no, not that one. He'd go down to the basement and come back sometime later with something he was willing to sell me. And we did this until one day I came, and there was a note on the door basically telling me that I had to phone a number, and he was no longer. So I think it was at that point that I thought, I want to write a book for Monsieur Hotel. I'm going to go dive back into the Jules Verne universe that I so loved in childhood, and basically, you know, either render a loving literary homage or write a piece of fanfic, your choice. So I did, and I thought, okay, you're Prince Dakar, the English have killed your family, your heart has turned to coal, you want a submarine to hide from the world. As you can see, this is a theme that I understood. So who do you get to build your submarine? And then I came across a magical name in something I was, you know, some rabbit hole I was going down. The name Isambard Kingdom Brunel. Isn't that a great name?
Kingdom.
Isambard Kingdom Brunel. I mean, I think Tristan is very fortunate I didn't come across that name before he was born. I just fell in love with that name. I didn't care who he was or what he did. It was just like, I wanted to be Isambard Kingdom Brunel. So I did some research and I found out some astonishing things about him. A couple years ago, the BBC did a poll on who are the 100 most important Britons. You can even tell, you can even sense the imperialism in that question. And Isambard Kingdom Brunel came in number 2 behind Winston Churchill. And it turns out he was the preeminent engineer of Victorian England. He built the Great Western Railway. He built Paddington Station. He built the first and longest suspension bridge over the Avon Gorge. He built the first tunnel under a river that anybody ever built under a river, using caissons and framing, that was built under the River Thames from Wapping to, I'm going to say Rotherhithe, but I've been corrected saying I should say Redriff. Anybody who really knows, please correct me. Anyway, he was that guy. He knew how to build things, and his love of building things coincided beautifully with the Victorian era and the empire. And among the things he built were the first 2 reliable and feasible ocean-going steamships, the Great Western and the Great Eastern. The Great Eastern was 6 times as large as any ship previously ever built. It had sails, it had paddles, it had coal furnaces, it had a propeller, it had everything. And so, and he died in the late 1850s, and I started trying to sort of rabbit and dado the real-life timeline of Isambard Kingdom Brunel and the timeline of the Sepoy Rebellion from Jules Verne, and it kind of sort of worked, or with a little carpentry it worked. And so I decided, okay, Prince Dakar becoming Captain Nemo is going to kidnap Isambard Kingdom Brunel, fake his death, trick his family into burying an empty casket, and impress him into service to build him his submarine. And I was so happy having realized that.
What is it? Wait, okay. What do you mean having realized that? Like, just, I mean, you say
I mean what I
realized-
said.
But you say realized as though it's there for the taking.
Yeah,
like
it was.
You turn the corner and
No,
you found
and I think anybody who sort of pondered these things for a bit would have come to the same conclusions. Maybe not, I'm hearing. I don't know. So that was sort of how it began, and then I thought, okay, the journey of the book is going to be the preeminent engineer, great at solving problems, but perhaps with some of the kind of moral blind spots that people who are very good at solving problems sometimes have. Going from being utterly resistant to the project to being entranced by the engineering problems and challenges to perhaps joining Nemo in his underwater campaign against Empire, British ships, and telegraphy. So that was how it started. And then I think the next thing that happened, and this would have come to you too had you given it any thought, was if there's going to be a guy under the sea who hates everything above it, don't we need, I mean, this is something I know as a screenwriter, don't we need a guy who lives on the sea and hates everything beneath it? I mean, that's just dramaturgy, right?
suddenly there was one handy.
Yeah, exactly, Captain Ahab, you know. And so if you were Cyrus Field, cable magnate, if you had wired the United States with telegraphy and made a huge profit and now wanted to connect Newfoundland and Ireland from Heart's Content to Foyle Hummerum with a line of cable on the bed of the sea, and 4 times you'd tried it and 4 times it had been severed by what you presumed to be a sea monster, who would you hire to run security against Sea Monster on your last and fiscally final attempt? Why, you would hire Captain Ahab.
That's right.
So in the same way that, you know, Captain Nemo dies at the end of 20,000 Leagues. He pops up again in Mysterious Island, but dies again. And I just assumed his second death, why shouldn't that be as provisional as the first? And then I thought, oh, and Ahab's death too. You know, I mean, human labor resurrects things from the dead, and so does prose fiction. So why not just have these 3 characters, your 2 great nautical antiheroes of the 19th century and a very, very real engineer, have at each other in a novel. And again, this didn't seem to me a feat of imagination. It just seemed like inevitable from the moment I knocked on Monsieur Routel's door. And that's what the book is. I'm sorry, that was a long drive for a short day at the beach, but I'll shut up and let Virginia talk now.
I mean, there were things we were talking about just backstage about Buenos Aires, and you sort of let yourself get mystical about the idea of what these place names might mean to you. You remember Hemingway says, like, sometimes only the place names have value. And you name these places with such enchantment. And I wonder, I mean, I know you've traveled widely, but how do these kind of romances, tell me about the fever dream where you are actually imagining the cable from, where are you? Are you on the moon looking back? I mean, like, for one human mind to grasp the Atlantic Ocean and the undersea and the collision of Verne and Melville, and then the second greatest Breton in history, and the engineering of these ships. I mean, what does that feel like? What does it feel like to be in your head? We got a little taste of it, but I just want to be back in there.
I think some of the people in the audience close to me may know what it feels like to be in my head. And in deference to them, I'll not comment further. But no, I mean, don't we, again, this is, I'm going to just throw this back on all of you. Don't you, I mean, if somebody says to you, you know, Plovdiv, don't you fall in love? It's like, you know, if somebody says Ottoman Empire, it's like, doesn't that give you visions of, like, you know, the head waiter at Sunset Towers? You know, I mean, it's just some words carry with them just a lovely freight of, a lovely scent of foreign brilliantines. It just makes you very happy to think of them. In terms of the deep dive under the North Atlantic, I mean, come on, wouldn't you love living in a world where you were required by your job to type the words foil hummerum and heart's content? Yeah, so I mean, and I think the main problem...
What are those two things?
The foil hummerum is the city in Valencia, Ireland, which is the European nexus of the cable, and Heart's Content in Newfoundland is where the cable reaches its other end. I didn't make these names up. Yeah. No, these are... And I think the main problem actually was a kind of technological one, which is when I grew up as a writer, the machine I used to write, the machine I used for distraction from writing, and the machine I used for research were 3 different machines in 3 different rooms. There was the typewriter, but it was for work. It wasn't, unless you wanted to make ASCII art, but there was, the TV, and then in another room there was the Wonder Book of Knowledge, which is where all knowledge... Why are you laughing? It's true. It had 14 volumes, and there, A to Bal, Bal to Biz, Cab to Cly, Cly to Den, Den to Fifth, Fifth to Gree, Gree to Jess, Jess to Min, Min to P, P to San, San to Tid, and Ty to Zwei, and everything you need to know.
That was amazing.
Is in those volumes. But then when I started writing this book, the machine I used to work and the machine I used to distract myself from my work and the machine I used for research were all the same machine, which has its advantages, which is to say, you don't have to get up from your chair. And its disadvantages because it's really easy to go down rabbit holes. It's really easy. And when you're stuck on a very difficult passage or the words are just not coming to you, maybe somebody liked something you did and you have to find out, or there's a little check mark, a little heart, or a little ding, and that little squirt of endorphin goes, and maybe you think it'll make up for the fact that you couldn't find the right word, but it never does. Anyway, the real task of this book, to be candid, was to be disciplined enough to do the research which would enable me to write the book without going over to the internet dark side and just never coming back to write. Mm-hmm. And I think what I finally decided was not to rely on the internet so much for research, but for its ability to bring to my doorstep obscure books from the 1850s, 60s, and 70s, which is amazing. You can learn about a book that has something you might need to know, and within 2 days you have that book, as opposed to how I spent my childhood, which was roaming used bookstores and leaving little index cards. And if you're lucky, 3 years later, you get a postcard from somebody saying, your book is in, So that was kind of heady and delirious, and that's really, if you want to know how I did it by reading many, many, many contemporary diaries, texts, memoirs, and I love, more than anything else, technical vocabulary.
Yeah, the book is chock full of this very gristly language that you have to memorize, like you did with the Wonder sequence.
Yeah, no. I mean, when I moved to California, and I'd never been behind the wheel of a car, I immediately got a 1960, well, not immediately, but fairly soon after, got a 1962 Thunderbird and started restoring it, because, I'm in California, I can do this shit. And if I'm to be honest, the reason I wanted to do it was partly for the car and partly because it enabled me to say things like idler arm mounting bracket. I just love things which have words to them that are terms of art, and those make me happy. And I think writing this book was a way of feeding that happiness.
So in the passage you read, you talked about, and this is a little bit what brings us together, you talked about kind of how sensory experience might be elided in all these locations that you talked about if everything were reduced to telegraphy and symbolic communication. Yeah. And I know, and I feel the same way, that I don't look at the internet. I can't be like Nemo and say we must sever connectivity and we need to dismantle Facebook, the empire on which the sun never sets, the biggest empire in the history of empire. I don't think that, I think one part of me thinks it needs to be broken up, and the other part of me thinks, as with every empire, that it's such an astounding achievement that the 7-year-old boy in me in Bedford-Stuyvesant wants to just say, I can't believe Facebook exists. Just as a monument of even kind of jerry-rigged engineering. It would have astonished the age of discovery, and much less 19th century early telecom figures. Anyways, but I have mixed feelings about these things. I can't get like Nemo. Like, we need to constantly break that thing, and that will break up empire, and that will save us, or save our atomized distinctions that are so important to us. But at the same time, who can believe now that connectivity is a given good? That we were told that connectivity, whatever that might mean, is just a good thing. The early advertisements for Facebook say just connecting people is a moral virtue.
Yeah.
And it's possible that it's not. And your book is such a great, kind of inquiry into whether it's a good or bad thing. And I know you love technology and also kind of loathe it, and that you have your own mixed history with internet technology.
Yeah, I do. I mean, to me, it's, I don't think we need, it's not like sort of, I remember, in college, there was a book that I had to read for a course that it was entitled something like, unemployment insurance, too much or too little. I don't view it as either an unalloyed menace that is going to rot all our brains and turn us away from literacy into kind of non-narrative little endorphin squirt machines. But I also don't believe that technology is necessarily a good thing, in the same way that if you think of the tunnels, the bridges, the boats, the railway, they're, all of these things are wondrous, but all of them happen at somebody's expense. And I think we all too often forget that. And my own experience with technology was, I was a science geek. I'm gonna, this is not humble bragging, this is bragging, what I'm about to do. I made a radio that combined super regenerative and super heterodyne circuitry, and won my school science fair and the district science fair and the second prize in the borough of Queens. So I'm like that guy.
There were any good science kids in Queens, so you had no competition.
Yeah.
No, I mean, that's
but that was who I was until I went over to the sort of prose side of the world. But I always have this deep fascination with, circuitry stuff. Like, how does stuff move from here to there through these weird other things? And then I was part of a very early virtual community called The Well, W-E-L-L. Anybody here know it?
There are some, yes.
Yeah. Are there any well-perns here? Oh, all right. Wow. Anyway, it was a kind of, it was a spin-off of the Whole Earth catalog and the EFF, Electronic Frontier Foundation. I think this dates me. And it was a collection of idiosyncrats, deadheads, techno geeks,
quite literally
hackers.
deadheads. One of the founders, John Perry Barlow, had been a lyricist for the Grateful Dead.
Absolutely.
And took the idea, right, of that you should, the way the Dead made aren't the Dead, whoever the derivation of the Dead, playing around here right now?
Tonight at the Hollywood Bowl, and if you drive back there, prepare to ford a sea of tie-dye.
So it's, I mean, this is maybe worth bringing up, that that John Perry Barlow and in this way Howard and I kind of intersected, because we both liked these early internet communities. John Perry Barlow had the idea that you give away the intellectual property, the songs, and make the money back on merchandising, selling T-shirts and whatever. So you could bootleg anything you wanted,
Right. Information wants to be free, which is both the most glorious. It's one of the more glorious lies of the early 21st century.
Well, right. I mean, people who own information don't want it to be free.
And people who make their living in intellectual property have opinions.
Yes, that's right. People who make their money in intellectual property have opinions. But I mean, you can imagine that was the idea well, I found it very heady, the idea that information wanted to be free. And I'm sure if you were at Electronic Frontier Foundation and at the Well, that there was an enormous amount of excitement that everyone could be a publisher and that you could find these weird communities and
Oh my God, yes. I mean, it was sort of if. Did any of you grow up in a family that made you, when you were past teenagehood, want to find your own elective family? You know,
Yes.
I see somebody doing a Snoopy dance back there. Thank you, Claudia. You know, the Well was perfect for that because you got to be in a room, a virtual room, but after, you know, spending 7-8 hours a day there, telnetting to the Well, you know, with no graphic user interface, no user experience, no UX, just like a blinking cursor and 26 letters. And a carriage return.
But you can project a lot onto that, as I remember from Conference XYZ, which predated the Well.
No. You are more of an OG in this than I am.
But you remember how you would look at, and this actually goes back to the passage. We are making this all connect. Do you remember how you could just look at the blinking cursor and just get this excitement? And then if you got a message from someone else, and telegraphy is the same way, from a few words, you could just pour everything into it. And when you had one of the phosphor green screens, black background, and it was like just inscribed on the face of God or something, outer space. You were just looking at such a deep background, language in the foreground, and often people saying flirty, love lettery kind of things. And I mean, nothing was more thrilling.
Well, with me, it was all about the idler or mounting brackets, but it was the same thrill.
Well, that's it. So definitely two roads diverged. And you're talking about the late 80s, right?
Yeah,
okay.
I am.
So, in the late 70s, I mean, I was a child, but that's when I was on this other thing. But the engineering types who cared about whatever you said, when I got my first lecture on programming in BASIC, I heard that there was such a thing as sysprogs, system programmers.
Sure.
And that sounded to me like lead singer, sounds like to other girls. I was like, sysprog, system programmer. Who could be more powerful? A system is huge, and the programmer runs it. I need to meet some sysprogs. But
as opposed to, prog rock.
Something like, exactly, prog rock, the direction you went. So,
yeah.
But instead of learning BASIC and becoming you or Mark Zuckerberg or something, I decided just to go groupie out on the sysprogs and just get really into the social life.
Did you ever meet any sysadmins?
Sysadmins came later. No, I stopped. The sysprogs were also very into Led Zeppelin, which appealed to my refined rock sensibility. And also gave me my first avatar name, and I want to hear your avatar name, Mr. Well. I feel like our first avatar name says how you came to the whole internet project, and mine was Athena. That's right, you're looking at Athena. I was a chubby 9-year-old, but I was a warrior, wise owl, or whatever Athena is.
And how did your parents feel about their 9-year-old daughter connecting with these unseen people?
First of all, I told them I was going to work. If you were going to work for NASA, the greatest achievement of mankind in 1979, you had to learn how to program computers, and programming computers meant that I had to exchange Led Zeppelin runes jokes with people under the name Athena. And
how do you pronounce the Troso album?
I always said Trofo, but I know there's the Troso thing. Or whatever.
Yeah, okay. Sorry.
But we had like masters and there was all kinds of weird stuff there. But anyway, the point is, it was escapist for me. The internet was escapist, and I can never begrudge it, even in these ideally waning days of, in particular, the Facebook empire, but some of the other giants that we're hoping will meet their ends, like the British Empire. Empires don't last forever. But anyway, even then,
don't.
I'm grateful. Even now, I'm grateful for those early days because, I wasn't quite escaping my parents in the same way, but I wanted just to be a different person in cyberspace. That's the thing that I think I don't understand how people passed up that opportunity.
How people lived when everybody knew you were a dog?
When everybody knew you were a dog.
Before cyberspace, when
when it stopped mattering, when you could pass in and out of being in 4th grade and then being Athena, and suddenly people took you seriously when you talked about Reaganomics. You know, everyone wants someone to listen to them about Reaganomics, right? I mean, you know.
Well, I envy you that childhood in the very heady early days of that kind of connectivity, but I think my own either cynicism or pragmatism, and you can decide which, is that as a friend of mine says, artists are to realtors as missionaries are to slave traders. And I think sometimes early technologists are to Alphabet, Google, and Facebook as missionaries are to slave traders. They civilize something which had been inchoate and make it comprehensible and make it rational and make it snap to grid. And then the question is, okay, great, a triumph of human technology and spirit, but who's getting fucked?
Yeah.
And I think I always, and this may be sort of, my upbringing in the bosom of the Communist Party of Brooklyn, I'm always wondering, it's always at somebody's expense, and you have to ask whose.
The whom.
Yeah.
What do you think that it's Brunel, right?
Isambard Kingdom Brunel, yes.
Yes. Would have, I'm going to,
WWIKBD?
yeah, more or less. What do you think he would have thought of internet technology? Because I do wonder what the great 19th century engineers would make of the shit show that is the internet, right? I mean, and how when people describe what the literal tubes, there's always like a kind of, it lacks elegance. It was improvised by people who didn't really know what they were doing, and it has all kinds of faults and glitches and malware and, yeah, it's hardly...
Yeah, right, the inner tubes, as George W. Bush would call them.
Which turns out to be, like, fairly accurate.
Yeah.
But, I mean, so what do you think that the real connoisseurs of great 19th century engineering would think of the thing that we just call technology, that just stands for technology, which is the internet?
It's a great question, and I don't think there's, I don't think there's an easy answer to that. I mean, I think... There is at one and the same time, and again, I'm not going to answer the question, is it a candy mint, is it a breath mint?
Yeah.
At one and the same time, if you are trying to solve problems through engineering or technology, it all feels like a triumph over, everything feels like a solution. Mm-hmm. So it's like, can we at Bletchley Park create a machine that can decode what the Germans are doing and win the war?
Yeah.
Who doesn't want that? Who doesn't like that? Who doesn't feel utterly triumphant when you have decrypted a message from a U-boat that might sink one of your ships?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think it's possible to be involved in this stuff on the level of, the wires, the relays, the routers, the system architecture, all the stuff that sort of just grew out from DARPANET and ARPANET, without feeling like every day you are doing more and more incredible things. But I do think that what that does is blinds us to the consequences of that. I mean, I'll give you an example from real life. Here, this is California. I can overshare, right? I had a biopsy. They took some tissue and they wanted to look at it more carefully. And as I was leaving, they said, "Oh, do you want the no error?" And I said, "What's that?" And they said, "Well, we are going to take a swab from your cheek, and that will give us your DNA, and then we'll match it to the DNA of the sample, and we'll make sure that the lab doesn't screw it up." And I said, isn't it the lab's job not to screw up, not my job to give you some of my cheek so that the lab doesn't screw up? And he just went like this, and then I said, "And what happens to my DNA data once they're finished determining that it matches up with that little sample in that little jar. And he said, oh, I'm sure they destroy it. And then I said, can I have that pamphlet? And I looked at it, and of course they don't destroy it. They make you pay for it. Your insurance may cover this. And then they monetize the data you've just given them from your cheek. And I think the people who invented this kit both thought, what a triumph of technology. We can eliminate errors in lab processing of biopsy samples. This is good for human progress. And I suspect they also said, oh my God, we've got these people at a very vulnerable place. They've just given a sample of their being, and they really don't want to do that again. And we're offering them an easy way to make sure that they don't have to come back and do it a second time. You know, VC walks into a bodega and says, what would the world look like if that guy were out of a job? You know, so I have a deep, deep suspicion of certain kinds of human progress. Sorry.
No, I share your suspicion. So do many people here. So I guess I want to continue to push this. I'm stuck on Facebook. I have this idée fixe that it is going to follow the arc of our other lost empires. Can you make that parallel? I mean, we're here to sort of liken 19th century telegraphy to 21st century internet technology. And are there any lessons?
Oh yeah, I think so. I mean, I would be leery of drawing the exact parallel saying, you know, Zuckerberg is Catullus, or Zuckerberg is Nero, or Zuckerberg, you know, I mean, I don't know.
Right, his empire's much, much bigger.
Yeah, exactly.
Nero hardly lives up to Zuckerberg for absence of moral responsibility and hubris.
Exactly, you know, but was probably a better fiddle player. I read all of the accounts of when the transatlantic telegraph cable was finally laid from Foyle Hummerum to Heart's Content, and it was there, you know, the phrase that you use in describing the internet, which is, what was it, delirious?
Oh, hallucinatory splendor.
Hallucinatory splendor, yeah. That was the way that the transatlantic telegraphic cable was experienced at the time it was laid. Placed on the bottom of the sea. The first thing that happened was that there was a telegraphic message from the president to the queen, and the queen responded back to the president. And when that response from the queen came back, there was a party in New York that lasted the better part of 21 days, continuous. They projected magic lantern slides on all the storefronts of Broadway. There were ballads composed to the glory of telegraphy, and you are so much the better for the fact that I'm not going to sing them to you. There were fireworks that went on for literally the better part of a month, culminating in the very large fireworks show on top of New York City Hall, which burned down New York City Hall. That was how enraptured people were by the internet, by the transatlantic telegraphic cable, while singing these ballads that people had composed, because this was going to be the greatest glory of the world, rivaling the sort of, what was it, you know, the pyramids, the this, the that, the cable, you know.
Among other things, by the way.
And I think it's not unlike, really, the way people greet now the ability to do, you know, your refrigerator can tell you when you're at the supermarket what it needs. These things are amazing, and we are, I think, enthralled to them, but I think there are other questions to be asked that we don't ask when we're in the middle of, okay, I'm going to get really snarky here. It's like,
Please do. I also want you to make a joke about that's teed up to make, which is about the American president and the Queen of England. One time they got along. You're describing a time when there was a special relationship between those two countries, as opposed to today.
And before she sort of dissed him in ways too subtle for him to understand by what hat she was wearing.
Amazing.
Yeah,
exactly.
God bless her.
Yes,
Yeah, I know.
exactly. Yeah, we had a little chat about this before. So, what were you going to tell
Yeah.
us? Tell us the
Who would have thought that we
off-road
would
story.
ever have a president that would make us all into Anglophiles?
Yeah, exactly. And think like yes.
Oh yeah.
And think Camilla Parker Bowles is the heart of that class.
Yeah.
Right? Like I just thought she's amazing. And didn't Prince Charles once say he wanted to be her tampon?
He did.
Right? But like that's nothing now. We think that's that's very refined
Yeah.
compared to our president. So wait, sorry, you were gonna go
Yeah,
off
no,
road.
but like, it used to be, I looked around my kitchen, saw what needed to be there, went to the supermarket or the market, got it, came back. Now I drive to the supermarket, I text someone and say, hey, what do we need? Is there anything else I can bring? And I go into the supermarket and I shop, and then I text somebody else and say, is there anything you need? And then I get in my car and I sort of, check my Twitter and check my Facebook, by which time maybe I should ask them again if there are other things that they need now that they probably didn't need 15 minutes ago. And I think it's great that now I never come back with somebody saying, you asshole, why didn't you buy you forgot the paper towels again. But on the other hand, what have we become that we can't go to the store without having to text multiple times to make sure that we're doing right the thing that we always knew how to do anyway? I just think that a lot of the mod cons of our life have side effects and contraindications that we don't spend too much time thinking about. On the other hand, without the internet, this conversation would never have taken place. We would never have found each other.
You're right. I mean, it's hard to imagine what happening in this room would have been happening pre-internet. I mean, this room is wired. It's throwing off data all the time. We are living in the internet. This is not. This room is wired.
Absolutely, and it's glorious, and I'm so happy for it. On the other hand, every time I go online, I'm leaving $3, $4, $5 worth of data trail that somebody is cashing in on, and not me.
So what is that?
It's one of these things that Silicon Valley says, and it's the truest thing that I think I know about the 21st century, which is if you think about not paying for Gmail and not paying for Facebook, if you are not paying for it, if it's free, you are the product.
Yeah.
And I think it's an argument, forgive me for being polemical, that really extends to large agency packaging. Can I go there? If you're not paying 10% to your agent, maybe you are the product. I do think that our job as writers, as citizens, is to make sure that we understand when something is free or given to us or makes life far more convenient, whose life it is making far less convenient and at whose expense.
I want you to say one more thing.
I just said that for the applause.
Yeah. I will say that it is just my luck that I have a son who has, he's 13 and he won't carry a phone. He's very proud of not carrying a phone, being the only one of his friends who doesn't. And he came up with his argument for why he is not going to have, he pitched that he's not going to carry a phone to me. I mean, it's a headache because I get texts for him, from his friends, for him, whatever. Anyway, his first thing is that he thinks it's feminizing to text and use emojis. And he just, like the jerk that he is, goes up to his friends who do that and say, texty, texty, emoji, emoji. I don't know.
Love this guy.
Yeah, right. And it is interesting. Like, yes, that's the first thing. The second thing is he says that it's an apron strings thing, which is true. Like, I just want to be able to follow him and monitor him and make sure he doesn't, he just does only what I want him to do. And then the last thing he says is that it's like compromising his resourcefulness because he doesn't want to use the GPS because he wants to find his way around. All right.
I could give him my phone and he would use the GPS on it and not find his way around.
Right. Yeah. And then he'd still have to learn his scout skills. But one thing that has become interesting to me is that I wrote a book in praise of the internet. What I like about the internet are, the sort of cultural aspects of it. And I started writing about culture, and then I realized that for pitching stories and books, that technology is like the masculine form of the word culture. Like, culture is sort of for girls, but then I suddenly would be like, I'm going to write about the technology of femininity. How about that? And they'd be like, now that sounds good. You were talking about some culture thing earlier, but technology, that's got some real muscle to it. So sometimes I just sub in the word if you want to, like, it's good for like selling a movie or whatever, selling books. Anyway, they don't like the word culture. They like science, though. The science of something.
Yeah.
I don't know anything about science, but they were like, can you put science in your title? Anyway, so I had written this about culture, this book, and really in praise of the internet. And Ben just, of course, didn't like it. Like, he just wanted to rebel and push back against it. And when I was talking about Magic and Lost to people, sometimes I would bring up that my son had decided not to use a phone. A lot of the times I was talking about interesting handheld culture in Japan and in New York. But one time I said, because he thinks it's girly, because he thinks it's whatever, he's just like jerky, early masculine ideas about it. And that's the only time I've gotten spontaneous applause and standing ovation, was just like, good, your son hates what you do. And the feminizing thing is really interesting. And, the possibility that, and phones, yes, they're deadening. I don't know, have you all followed that? The interface of our phones with the like ticky-tacky Levittown houses, little apps, is it's so monotonous to look at that as opposed to look at like a human face. But that had to be sort of spelled out in Silicon Valley with microdosing of LSD, where this like group of boys that decided they weren't going to use their phones anymore, like my son, they needed to like bore themselves with it. So they took this dose of LSD. You can do it without the LSD. And suddenly
Why?
The faces, why would you? The faces of people on the bus were so interesting. And there's a little Silicon Valley cult of tree literacy where you understand the UX of a tree. It's amazing. It's very, very lifelike. The way the bark, it's better than AI. It grows, it learns.
Yeah.
Anyway. But in some ways, this book makes me think of that because, yes, you're so in the object world. There's very little abstraction. You love the names of things and places, and it's almost like an anti-digital artifact. It's sort of like, yeah.
In Magic and Loss, you make the distinction, and I think it's a wonderful one, between literacy and bibliophilia.
Oh, yeah.
And I think you know what side of that divide I live on.
Yeah.
But I think it is true that for those of us who are old school paper hounds, give me the scent of, decaying
The mold.
pulp.
You guys
the mold.
love that mold.
Give me the mold.
Yeah.
That we sometimes deny the fact that due to the internet and due to phones, people read more every day than they ever have in human history.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And even if I think, and this is another argument that you make beautifully in your book, people like Steve Jobs and Zuckerberg are in some ways don't believe in narrative. They believe in images, or they believe in icons,
Yes.
or they believe in moments.
Yeah. Music for Jobs.
Yeah.
He really thought of it as a music box. Ultimately he wanted disembodied sound.
Exactly.
He describes speaking of tripping, it describes a time of taking drugs, and he did that phone freaking thing too.
Yeah.
He was high, I guess, and he was looking out at this field of wheat, and it was playing Bach. Like somehow the wheat was playing Bach, and he was enchanted by this idea of sound coming where it's not supposed to come from.
And what he did by sort of, being on the leading edge of the wave of the compression algorithm that destroyed the music business was convince us that MP3s actually play music when in fact they play something that sufficiently resembles music that we reconstruct something like we remember music to have been in our heads.
That's right. That's really well said. And then the earbuds, the Frankensounds, it's astonishing. MP3 board that decides that the facts, they're like a reproduction of a sound signal.
Yeah, I mean, when, in my college dorm days, we, used to tune our guitars and, say, well, good enough for folk music.
Yes, yeah.
But, I mean, I don't think we meant it.
Well, probably, and people praise this book as steampunk, and that's a good word for it. I mean, steampunk is sort of a perfect aesthetic to counter this antiseptic, human-hating Johnny Ive look of things. Do you know that phones our screens are oleophobic? They hate oil, and they just hate us. Like, they hate our skin, they hate our hair, they hate little fingernails. Like, they just kind of want to be in a clean room all the time. But anyway, steampunk is the opposite. Steampunk has coal and dust and whatever. And I was just in a recording studio where they introduce dust into the works so that things don't sound like MP3 Frankensounds.
Or modern digital recording studios that output to reel tape just so they can, that's so it can sound.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think the wonderful word for these things is skeuomorphs, where you use digital technology to create something that seems like it kind of sort of used to be. Like, anybody remember the original Apple iCals that had like a ring binder on the side to make you think you could actually rip out a page?
Yeah. Yes.
But, when I hear of the oleophobia of the screens, the way they repel oil, then I think that one of the most beautiful things that I know of in cultural history is the face of Marlene Dietrich. And that would not have been possible without Joseph von Sternberg carefully applying nose oil to the lens as a diffraction filter.
Oh, that was the fascinating.
And so
from his own nose.
Yes.
So it's filtered through this kind of revolting oils than her beautiful.
Don't think of Joseph von Sternberg's nose oil. Just think of Dietrich's face, and aren't you glad it exists?
Perfect. Yes, I am very glad it exists.
And it makes me glad that in the old days, I feel like my grandfather. In the old days when glass liked oil, things were possible.
The oleophilic days.
Yeah.
That's a real distinction that we probably need to draw.
That's my next novel, by the way.
I think I love it.
Oleophilia. Do you like that title?
Oleophilia. I'm so into it. And it could be about olive oils and we'll talk about it later.
Okay. Should we ask people if they have any questions?
If they have any questions on any subject, but the Great Eastern, that's sort of these early telecom, I think, is maybe the place to start. But I like hearing about early internet experiences and virtually anything.
So I'm curious,
Wait for the microphone so everyone can hear.
What is your next novel?
I don't know. I mean, I have an idea for what I want to do next, but most of the people around me with sort of a sound business sense have not been so encouraging. Which means I think I'll write it anyway. But I found a historical figure who was at one and the same time a noted science fiction writer, a well-chronicled schizophrenic, and the person who invented psychological warfare for the CIA, and I want to tell his story. 1940s, 50s.
Who is that?
Cordwainer Smith.
Did someone else jump on that? Already know that?
And, I mean, I think I was just looking for a name that was halfway as good as Isambard Kingdom Brunel, and Cordwainer Smith kind of does that. I don't know. Rick, are you saying don't do it? Okay, we got a thumbs up. More questions.
My question is, I love the idea of mixing historical figure, real figures, and heroes of fiction of the same era. Did you have anybody else you wanted to put in the mix? Did you think of, I don't know, Sherlock Holmes coming all of a sudden into the mix or something like that?
Yeah, I mean, I always want to, I wanted to, and I did. I mean, the first draft of this book was 823 pages, so there was a lot of room for many people who didn't belong in the book to be in the book. And then I think on the advice of my then literary agent, she said, you have to lose some pages. And so I cut it down from a very self-indulgent 823 to kind of sinewy 802. But there are actually many historical personages who were in the book who are now just in that. Is this like completely fucked up of me that I wish there were DVD extras for novels? Because I really want all of those people to be back, at least in the same kind of box set. But my fear is they never will be, and probably for the better, but thank you for asking. Yeah, exactly.
So I have a question. In your acknowledgments, you mentioned Peter Schmidt and Brian Eno's Oblique Strategies cards.
I do.
And there's a whole other kind of technology. Can you give an instance in which you used those cards in the writing of this book?
Yeah. Do people know about Brian Eno and Peter Schmidt's Oblique Strategies? It's a set of cards which was originally developed for artists and people in recording studios. When you're stumped and need to make a decision, you pick a card, and the zen of it is you do what that card says. You don't just then keep picking cards till you get one you like. And sometimes the card says, my favorite one is honor your error as intention. One of them says, make it less human. One of them says, make it more human. One of them says, do nothing. One of them says, do the same thing for a very long time. And I make use of those cards. I wouldn't say every day I write, but certainly every week I write when I am just in the slough of despond and don't think I could write another word. I'll pick a card, and if what it tells me to do just feels deeply, deeply wrong, I'll do it, but somehow in the process of doing something that feels really wrong, you get unstuck. I would really recommend these to everybody, and I have a couple of sets of them. One of them is a first edition, and I hope that it will, when my Writers Guild insurance lapses, it will pay for everything. But thank you, Anthony. There must be more questions. Yes.
Please wait for the mic. Please wait for the mic.
Hold it, Nick. There's a microphone coming toward you.
Talk a little bit about the heroic, painful process of cutting the book down.
Yeah.
It was several stages, right?
It was several stages, and I have to actually give a shout out to Nick and Robin, who are sitting back there, because one of the heroic, painful stages of cutting the book down would never have happened had they not lent me their house, which was a very peaceful place in which I could spend solid, uninterrupted time taking a machete to my own words. And the process of cutting it down was, I think heroic is generous. I mean, basically, okay, here's the dirty secret. I've spent most of my life writing screenplays. They're 117 pages and you're out. You cannot go on a digression. You cannot do that. You cannot get inside somebody's head. You have to say, what they do, how they move. Every page has to give you a reason to want to read the next page. There has to be narrative drive. So if you've done this for many decades of your life, at a certain point you wake up and say, fuck y'all, I'm going to write something which has nothing but digressions, and I'm going to spend whole long chapters in people's heads. And if I want to write something that is, 300, 400, 823 pages, who's going to stop me? No one. So I think in some ways the first draft of the book was a reaction formation to a lifetime of screenwriting. And then I think the process of painfully and heroically cutting it down was taking the narrative skills I'd learned over a lifetime of writing that I had deliberately kept outside the door and bringing them back in to take these glorious digressions and these glorious inside people's heads for 200 pages and all of the other things that I was doing as a bad boy screenwriter acting out. And bit by bit by bit, over a series of 4 long sessions and 2 smaller ones, understanding that the book that lived inside me that I had allowed to come forth wasn't necessarily the book that people reading it would create the same feeling in them. And how did I get a vision? How did I get a version of the book that was pure enough and readable enough and in its own way had enough narrative so that the reader would become as entranced by these worlds as I was when I was writing it? And I'd assumed very naively that if I just wrote everything that I knew, that would do it. And then I think I realized slowly and painfully and over a course of 3.5 years that my work was not yet finished. I don't know if that answers your question. It is a different book. It is certainly a less self-indulgent book. It is certainly a more readable book. It is certainly a book which is far more reflective of my writerly skills. And in some ways, you know, I like the big, old, sloppy, stupid one better. But that's my problem, not yours now. And I think that's the happy ending.
What are your favorite top 10 proper nouns in the book?
Ooh, I like.
Oh, wow.
Well, you got to stick with your cities.
Well, I mean, a lot of them are cities. I like all of the nautical terms. I mean, sump pump. It's not a proper noun, but you know, I mean, don't you just love the way that sounds? And it's onomatopoetic, because if you think of what a sump pump does, it probably sounds like sump pump, sump pump. I like just all the names of the people. You know, a guy named Sir Daniel Gooch. I mean, isn't, you know, if you were Isambard Kingdom Brunel and you were building a ship and you needed a financer, wouldn't you find a guy or create a guy named Sir Daniel Gooch? I just love the way history throws up the right name for people again and again and again and again.
Could you say a little more about Captain Ahab?
Yeah, I'm really happy to. Weirdly, I mean, I'm, you know, a son of Bedford Stuyvesant, and you would think writing the American characters would come easily for me. But in fact, you know, I'm a kind of, to use, you know, Stalin's lovely phrase, I'm a rootless cosmopolitan. And writing the voices of educated Europeans somehow is easier for me than writing American voices. I mean, the Oxford-educated Prince Dakar, his language and diction and syntax and cadences came to me almost immediately, whereas when I had to write Ahab, I was lost. And part of the reason for that is that we don't know, I mean, for the fact that Ahab is one of the great iconic figures of literature, we don't know very much about him at all. We don't know his first name, or maybe we don't know his last name. We know basically where he's from. We don't know really anything about his wife. I mean, there's like a sentence about his wife, which inspired a wonderful novel called Ahab's Wife.
It's I widowed that girl when I married her, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But so I had to kind of invent a voice for Ahab. And I think when I started writing this, part of what was going through my head was the way in which America, you know, to use the South Park locution, America, fuck yeah, was bombing the shit out of nations a very long way away from us who hadn't done shit to us, but we were going to do it because they were sort of near the people who had done shit to us, but we couldn't bomb them because they were our friends. I don't want to get into talking about Saudi Arabia here in public. It's not fun. But I think that, you know, when Tom Friedman said that the reason for the Iraq war was because America needed to say to somebody, anybody, suck on this. So I was obsessed with that voice. I wanted a real American yawp voice. And the two voices that came into my head as I was trying to figure out my Ahab voice were The first one was William S. Burroughs, who just strikes me as one of the great American voices of my time, you know. Sometimes the trap door opens and that it for Johnny hanging by a rope and a string of rancid jism in the junk sick dawn. And I thought, well, that could be Ahab. And then I think it was a hop, skip, and a jump from William S. Burroughs to Iggy Pop. You know, I played the song Search and Destroy a lot, you know. High flying cheetah with a heart full of napalm. That could be Ahab. And so I channeled the shirtless Iggy and I channeled the sort of Harvard-educated junkie William S. Burroughs and kind of put them in a little mix master and came up with my Ahab voice. And then once I knew the voice, then I knew things about him that I hadn't known before. For instance, I mean, I can't speak for who he is in Mr. Melville's novel, but in this novel, he has a male lover. I can't speak to you know, how he really feels about engineering, but in this book, a ship that is made of iron is not a ship, and a ship that doesn't have sails is not a ship. So I kind of took every cliche about, you know, Cap'n Salty and combined it with Mr. Burroughs and Mr. Pop and came up with a voice. But it took me a long time. It took me the better part of a year to get that voice. And once I had it, I was really, really happy because I'd wake up in the morning and write my Ahab before I was awake. And then when I read what I had written, I was happy.
I think that's it. Hearing the voices in your head it's just a great taste of the book, but letting us get in your head by giving us this book well, I felt it as an honor to me as a reader, and I know everyone else will too.
Well, thank you, Virginia, for this discussion. Thank you again, Hammer Museum and Claudia, and thank you again, all of you, for being here and being part of this evening. I think I now go to that table and stand and sign should any of you have books or want to purchase them back there. So I hope to see you there, but if I don't see you there, thank you for coming here tonight. I have to say, and I mean no disrespect to you, isn't a room full of people like this, you know, a hell of a lot better than Twitter?